Coming up on Arirang News, with inflation expected to continue, the Bank of Korea says it'll be raising interest rates before the year is out. The timing, though, will depend on the pace of the economic recovery. South Korea reports more than 600 new coronavirus cases on Thursday, with about a week to go until the distancing rules are due to be eased. There's growing concern about cases of the Delta variant as well. And data show last year almost 500,000 South Koreans moved from the cities to the countryside, many of them to retire, but also people old and young looking to start new lives farming and fishing. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The governor of the Bank of Korea says interest rates could go up this year as the BOK shifts toward a post-pandemic policy. But that's contingent on a solid economic recovery. He also said inflation is likely to remain high for the rest of 2021. Kim Sung-min reports.
Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol on Thursday once again signaled a rate hike within this year as part of an orderly exit from the pandemic-led monetary easing policy.
We have made it clear that from this year we will adjust the current monetary easing policy, but the timing depends on the economic recovery, as well as inflation and other financial market conditions.
He agreed to the necessity of raising the record low key rate of 0.5% due to the recent economic recovery, but insisted that rates won't be raised more than needed. His remarks came during a briefing of the central bank's biannual report examining the country's overall inflation situation. Here, he also said inflation in South Korea will continue to heat up in the second half of 2021, also on the back of the economic recovery. While the consumer inflation rate at the beginning of this year fell far short of the government's target of 2%, it rapidly climbed to reach 2.6% in May, the highest since March 2012. The central bank attributed the sharp increase to supply factors and higher prices of agricultural products following last year's cold wave and avian influenza, as well as the rise in global oil prices. The BOK says, along with these factors, rising consumer demand following the economic recovery will further push up inflation. However, it added that how long the higher inflation lasts for depends on several risk factors, such as the price increases of agricultural products and the global inflation situation. And it said if the pandemic lasts longer than expected, it could pull down consumption again, overturning the current inflation trend. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
And South Korean consumers are apparently still optimistic about the economy for a fourth month in a row. The Bank of Korea says its composite consumer sentiment index in June was at 110.3, the highest it's been since January 2018, well before the pandemic. From the month before, it was up 5.1 points. A reading above 100 means optimists about the economy outnumber pessimists. The central bank attributed this to the recovery, citing the faster-than-expected vaccine rollout and strong exports. South Korea is taking action to prepare for the hydrogen car era by making hydrogen fuel cheaper. From next month, hydrogen fuel stations will be able to procure hydrogen more cheaply thanks to a group purchasing program led by the government. The government made the announcement today and said that it will increase the number of hydrogen fuel stations in the program from the current 12 to 60. The government hopes the project can help fuel stations, which are operating at a loss due to high prices and the limited number of hydrogen-powered cars on the roads. The first round of this project lowered the average price of hydrogen by 11%. Korea's Constitutional Court has upheld a law that bans ride-hailing services like the company Tada, which offers services that are similar to taxis while not officially being a taxi service. The court said the so-called Tada Prohibition Act passed earlier this year banning such services is indeed constitutional because it seeks to prevent inequality between businesses like Tada and actual taxis, which are highly regulated. Tada's parent company, VCNC, which challenged the law in court, had argued that the law infringes on the rights of consumers to hire drivers for themselves. Tada's business was to rent vans seating 10 to 15 people that came with a driver. It suspended its services last month indefinitely. In the pandemic last year, almost 500,000 people in South Korea moved from the cities to the countryside. According to Statistics Korea and the government, the number of people moving to farming or fishing villages topped 495,000, an increase from the year before of 34,000. It's the first time the figure's risen in a couple of years. By age group, those in their 50s and 60s together accounted for more than half of all the people moving to the countryside, many of whom hope to farm or fish. But there's also a growing number of people younger than that who want to start new lives in the countryside. A significant number of them are in their 30s or even younger, and they hope to live lives that are more balanced. Our Min Soo-kyun interviewed a young couple who made the move and who say they want to change the perception of farming and inspire others.
Here in Chungcheongbuk-do Province, young farmers are leading the future of farming. They're inspiring others who wish to settle down in the country. 35-year-old Lee Ji-yeon moved with her husband to Kwesan County in 2017. She holds a master's degree from Seoul National University and had been working at a research institute in Seoul. Her husband had been working as a landscape designer for 13 years. The two had a stable life, but it wasn't the life they dreamed of.
When we got married, we didn't have time to have dinner together. One of us would always have to work till late, and even if we didn't have overtime work, we would be tired by the end of the day. This made us think about our future and the kind of life we really wanted to live.
When they became mushroom growers, many friends questioned their decision.
They said I was overqualified for the job, but that's not true. The work farmers do is meaningful and requires special skills. I don't see why people underestimate their work.
With 4 other farmers, Lee Ji-yeon and her husband decided to promote the benefits of farming. They've opened a cafe for people to enjoy desserts made from freshly harvested crops, and they're now also running an 8-week course to give young aspiring farmers a hands-on experience.
I'm learning a lot about a wide variety of crops and getting practical knowledge about organic and sustainable farming. I feel like I'm getting to know more about it, so I'm really excited.
Many more young adults in South Korea are leaving their 9-to-6 jobs to farm. According to data released by Statistics Korea on Thursday, the number of farming households totaled 12,489 in 2020. Of them, the number of households headed by farmers under the age of 40 rose to 1,362, up 153 from a year earlier.
When the movie Little Forest was out, people were like, you can't live like that, that's just a movie. But in fact, you can. You can live that life only if you have a comprehensive plan to get started in farming.
The couple say they haven't regretted their decision to become farmers, not even for a single day. Min Soo-kyun, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, good to have you back on. Thanks for making time today.
Happy to be here.
Well, stocks in New York overnight, tech doing a little better than the others. The Nasdaq at a new high, but it was the third session down for the S&P. What's the story in the global markets?
Okay, well, S&P was down, but it's only down 0.1%, and it's only 0.4% away from the all-time high closing. Dow actually went up by 0.2%, and NASDAQ, as you mentioned, it hit an historical high closing, but it only rose by 0.1%. It seems like we have a lot of liquidity, a lot of money seeking where to go. It doesn't quite know where to go. There are too many uncertainties now about inflation, labor market, and the speed of the recovery. There had been a lot of concern about inflation, but Fed Chairman Powell has been making his point again and again that there is probably not going to be 1970s type sustained inflation. A lot of people have been worried, especially because lumber prices had gone up, but in the last couple of weeks, this high lumber price has just come down. So now there's some uncertainty about whether there will be inflation, how bad, and whether it'll be temporary or permanent. So I think that's making a lot of investors somewhat cautious. And then similar things seem to be happening with the labor market. At first, we thought that the U.S. recovery will be very quick, but labor market seems to be slow in recovering, partially because labor supply may be hitting a limit. There are indications that workers are not excited about returning to full-time jobs, and there are a lot of retired workers that will not be coming back into job market at all. So wages may rise, but that may not lead to a very high inflation because U.S. Economy had been becoming more oligopolistic in last decade or so. So companies may be able to absorb these higher labor costs. So the stock market seems to be it's hitting the highs, but it's not something that you would think of as a strong rally because there's just so many uncertainties.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And you mentioned lumber as one thing. You mentioned used cars, I believe, when we spoke before. Both things highly dependent on low inventories, it would seem, in housing and cars. But to look over here in Korea, we see stocks of a couple of big tech names, Kakao and Naver, continuing to race higher over the past few weeks, though Kakao pulled back quite a bit today after recently outperforming. If you could tell us about those two for a minute, but also the action today here in Korea in general.
Okay, well, Kospi hit 3,286.10. That is the highest closing number. Kosdaq ended at 1,012.62. That's down 0.4% from yesterday, but still, it's over 1,000. So Kosdaq is also doing very well. And one of the reasons why these markets are doing well is, tech companies like Kakao and Naver, as you mentioned. And Kakao and Naver has been getting a lot of news because their value has been growing very quickly this year, and not only have their values gone up, but Kakao, which used to be the fourth largest company in terms of market capitalization, overtook Naver, which used to be the third highest market capitalization company. And the sum of these two companies, the capitalization seems to be approaching that of Hyundai Automobiles Group, which is the second largest conglomerate in terms of market capitalization. So why is Kakao doing so well? It seems to be their profitability. The stock prices for Kakao has risen by 117% this year so far. Naver has been rising by 45%, even though Naver is doing somewhat slower than Kakao. That's percentages, nothing to sneeze at. And the reason for this very high growth seems to be that the Kakao is becoming very aggressive. Kakao is a relatively new company in Korea, and they've been going into various fields of taxis, games, financial markets. So they have been expanding a lot very aggressively, whereas Naver is a bit of a larger player. It's been around longer. So people seem to be very excited about Kakao's aggressive strategy, but they haven't really hit a barrier. They haven't really run into a problem so far. So it'll be interesting to see what would happen if there is a hiccup in Kakao's very aggressive strategy.
It's an interesting idea. It's amazing that a company like that, like Kakao, could be on par with one of the world's great automakers. But zooming out here, let's look at oil prices, which have been rising as data show U.S. oil inventories are down. West Texas crude for August is up about 0.3%. At the same time, OPEC is said to be talking about ramping up production, which could bring prices down. Tell us about the situation with oil, Professor.
Okay, well, last year, and when the coronavirus hit, oil prices fell, and it hit the lowest point in April, and it was only $16.94 a barrel. But yesterday at closing, it hit $78.03 per barrel, West Texas Intermediate. It's approaching the 5-year high, which was hit at October 2018 of $74.34. And what are the reasons? Well, there's hopes of recovery, and then prices usually go up just before summertime because in the United States and in Europe, people go out driving, and that usually drives the oil prices up. And the lot of money, a lot of liquidity that was going around. We talked this about just a little bit before concerning the stock market. Some of that money may be going into oil commodity investments as well, and then there's maybe some expectations that even though OPEC will step up supply, it'll take time to catch up to the increase in demand that we expect to see in the United States and Europe because they're normalizing because of the vaccination, and people may be driving a lot more this year than last year. So there's really strong forces driving the oil prices up, but will it hit the highs over $100? Will it come close to historical high, which was $147 per barrel that we saw in June 2008? Probably not, because if the prices get too high, the U.S. may start production of shale oil again, and there's a lot more electric cars on the road now and a lot more recognition of dangers of carbon emissions. So it'll probably still go up. It may even go above $100, but will it hit a historical high? I don't think so.
And you mentioned liquidity, Professor. So finally, the Korean economy this past year has been pretty remarkable, and it's running hot with a lot of money pouring in from the government and the Bank of Korea. At the same time, there are many inside and outside the government who warn that there's going to be an inflationary hangover coming from this. What's your view, Professor?
Okay, well, both the Bank of Korea and the government ministries, the technocrats, seem to be very nervous about having too much money in terms of BOK's expansionary monetary policy and government's fiscal policy. It really seems to be just the political side of the government that really wants to have large expansionary fiscal and monetary policy at the same time. The BOK Governor Lee Ju-yeol has mentioned that he is concerned about asset market bubbles and increasing household and corporate debt, and he's been giving a lot of signals that he may raise the interest rate during this year, and he even mentioned that the rate might rise as much as 0.5%, and even with the 0.5%, because Korean rates are now so low, even if you raise the rates by 0.5%, you should still consider the monetary policy as being expansionary. And then on the government side, Vice Minister Hong Nam-gi has tried to limit the amount of fiscal policy that the political side of the government wants to have for the second supplementary budget. They're negotiating that right now, but it seems like the technocrats want the scale of the policy to be lower, whereas the political side wants it to be higher. Now, expansionary fiscal policy coupled with contractionary, shrinking monetary policy may be a good policy because there is a lot of adverse effects coming from too much liquidity. The bubbles in the housing market, stock market, rising debt are just part of the problems. But coronavirus recession and recovery has been K-shaped. Some people have been hit a lot. Some people have not gotten hit at all. So wisely plotted fiscal policy can help the people who got hit, but control the bubbles that we see in some of the asset markets like the stock market or the housing market.
Very interesting, Professor. We'll have to leave it there for today, unfortunately. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us on that subject. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
South Korea confirmed more than 600 COVID-19 cases on Thursday, just a week ahead of the introduction of a less stringent social distancing scheme. Local experts are also increasingly concerned about the spread of the Delta variant. Kim Do-yeon has the details.
South Korea reported 610 new cases of COVID-19 on Thursday, with 576 locally transmitted. The capital region continues to account for the majority of the cases a week before the new, less stringent social distancing measures come into effect. With this, the authorities are now worried of variant cases in South Korea. The Delta variant, which was first spotted in India, is particularly concerning. While the Alpha variant still accounts for most of the variant cases in the country, Delta accounted for 35 of the cases last week. The Delta variant has already spread to at least 80 countries and has been reported to be more transmissible than other strains. Without early prevention, South Korea could see a fast rise in Delta cases too. As of now, the total confirmed Delta variant cases are at 190. In addition to this, there are 66 more cases that epidemiologists are assuming to be the Delta variant. Studies from other countries show that vaccines are effective against the Delta variant. While slightly less effective compared to the original strain or the Alpha variant, Pfizer can be 87.9% effective against the Delta variant after 2 shots of the vaccine, and AstraZeneca is 59.8% effective. With this, the health authorities say that the best way to prevent the Delta variant from becoming the dominant type of COVID-19 in South Korea is by swift inoculation and maintaining good personal hygiene. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And as the Delta variant spreads around the world, the health authorities in the U.S. and Europe warn that it could become the dominant strain of the virus in those places within weeks. Choi Won-jong has this report.
COVID-19 variants are spreading rapidly across the globe, putting Europe and the U.S. on alert. The Delta variant appears to be more transmissible than other mutations and is even impacting countries with high vaccination rates. According to Europe's CDC, by the end of August, 9 out of 10 infections in the EU will be Delta variant. Health officials have warned that the variant will quickly spread, mostly in younger generations, and have urged the public to get vaccinated as soon as possible. In the UK, the country is facing a COVID-19 resurgence due to the Delta variant. More than 16,000 daily cases were reported on Wednesday, the highest figure reported since early February. UK health authorities identified 90% of new COVID-19 cases related to the Delta variant, and has also seen 41 cases of Delta Plus, which is reported to be stronger than the Delta variant. The emergence of Delta variant has led the UK government to delay lifting COVID-19 restrictions by 4 weeks until July 19th. The Delta variant is also spreading in neighboring France.
In France, the Delta variant represents between 9 to 10% of infections. It's a proportion that is at first glance comparable to what we observe in the United States and probably in Germany.
In the U.S., the Delta variant has been detected in all states except South Dakota. Top U.S. disease expert Dr. Fauci said in a briefing that the Delta variant makes up more than 20% of infections, adding that it will be dominant in weeks. Choi Won-jong, Arirang News.
Time magazine has published a new interview with South Korean President Moon Jae-in in which he reaffirms his determination to work on the Korean Peninsula peace process during the remainder of his term. He described the peace process right now as very fragile and at risk of being shaken at any time. But he expressed hope that the Biden administration can bring North Korea back to the negotiating table and praised President Biden's support for inter-Korean dialogue, engagement, and cooperation. As a means of resuming talks with the North, President Moon suggested vaccine diplomacy. He also recalled how he built mutual trust with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un through constant dialogue and communication. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.